Okay, good. All right, so I think we can start. So David Clairbout kindly participated in our first online exhibition titled The Eye of the Storm, and which is part of our first online initiative called Open. And he showed the work, oil workers from the Shell Company of Nigeria returning home from work, caught in torrential rain. It's a work from 2013. And you can still very much see this feature, online feature on our website. It includes exhibition, kids initiatives, and our public program. For more information, please visit our website at www.blitzvalletta.com and sign up to our newsletter. So I will give a small introduction of David Claerbout. He focused primarily on photography, video, sound, drawing, digital arts, as well as large-scale video installation. In fact, we were particularly grateful for him to decide to change his work and display it on our online website. In his works, the reconfiguration of images from 2-dimensionals to 3-dimensionals bestow a socio-political weight and also questions sensory authenticity and the now disappearing system of trust between reality and representation. In our conversation, we're definitely going to be speaking about oil workers, the work that we showed at Blitz. We're going to speak in general about his practice and also mention some of his very interesting ideas that are part of his seminal text, The Silence of the Lens, that was published also on Influx Journal in 2016, and where you can read it there still today. Saying something about David's exhibitions right now. He has a lot of exhibitions on in different parts of the world. One is at Garage Lab in Moscow that also earned him an Art Forum Critic Pick that you can read online. Pylon Hub in Dresden, Kunsthalle Rotterdam, Project Space of the Inside in Amsterdam, Kunstmuseum Basel, and Busan Museum of Art in South Korea. Well, something that I would like to show you before we start, it's David's website, because I think it's actually very, very informative. It's like an open portfolio available for everyone. So I'm going to show you right now. Here it is. You see, you know, the website opens and you see all his works. Every artwork has a devoted page. Very, very informative. We can go down and we see oil workers, for example, where you can also see some videos of previous installations. If you go back up, you can also see a list of exhibitions with links for more information, texts and lectures, publications, contacts, and obviously if you want to follow him on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Here I'm also showing for those of you that couldn't see the exhibition, this was our grand finale with all the works that we showed. Each artwork also had 1 month display. And here is David Claerbout's Oil Workers. Right now, obviously, this exhibition is not online anymore. But if you click on our archive, you can still download the catalog and read more about it. So now I'm going to stop sharing the screen and just ask an initial question to David, which is, well, for 15 years, you were a traditionally skilled draftsman and lithographer, then came photography and 3D animation, pictorial 3D, with your studio that started in 2010, if I'm not wrong. Today, you define yourself as an autodidact in virtual image making. So how did you start and what virtual image making means?
I started very young, in the sense that when I was really young, let's say age 10, I knew I was good for nothing else than drawing and painting. And so by the time that I had age 28, 27, I felt that I had a career without much success, but it felt like I was young, but at the same time I had the feeling of having a lifetime in painting, and I came to an end. I came to a dead end with a strong feeling that there was nothing else to be added there. And I did do some photography, but I was really always more known as someone who's good with a pencil. And so at one point, I would say, in terms of what I had done, I had become a really, really overweight person. I had done so much, except for sculpture. I was overweight with a lot of stuff in my head. And I went on a regime, on a diet for 2 years, doing nothing but basically scavenging through books and libraries and everything that I could get my hands on without much program, and losing weight, essentially, losing artistic weight, which worked. That diet worked, and after a few years, I had the feeling I could start again. And I picked up with essentially with what was making an archive of found photographs. And those became several hundreds, several thousands, tens of thousands. Initially, they were slides, then there were reproductions, and then there were digital reproductions. And I think from there, my life started again. So
From
I
an
think,
archive, basically.
yes, losing all those great artistic traditions. So that's why I'm a self-taught artist at one point, and I was always quite hungry to know what was going on out there in terms of cameras, in terms of technologies, in terms of what we could use. And in a perverse way, almost all of my ideas, you don't have any control over your own ideas. They were complex, and they were sometimes like mission impossibles for an artist. But yeah, those were the only ideas I had, and that's how I've been working all that time.
And where does virtual image making starts, with this archive in your hands, with all this research that was coming before that?
It starts around oil workers, I would say, maybe a little bit earlier, when I did a film titled Travel, which was the first piece that's filmed or set entirely in a forest, but that's been composited entirely in the studio and in the computer. And a journey started from there in terms of virtual image making, but also in terms of cognitive sciences. And it's been quite a baffling journey, in the sense that I'm every day still learning new facts about the analogies between the technologies that we are using, which we like to call new technologies, and the discoveries that are made today about our nervous system, yeah, and about our cognition and about our perception. Things like compression, divided attention, all these things that come back in virtual image making, which you will always find in the cognitive sciences and in your own nervous system. And that has led me to believe that all that human beings have been doing while developing technologies throughout the centuries is nothing more and nothing less than the expression of their own nervous system at that time, and what they thought their own nervous system looked like. For example, in the time of René Descartes, it looked very mechanistically, and that's how it was described. When Freud came, it was a steam engine. The psyche was a steam engine, and that's then how it looked like. And today, it's really quite different, but also a little bit more precise. And there are things like that we all got used to. Let's say compression, image compression, data compression, which is something the brain is very good at. It's a Darwinian result of trying to do as much as possible with as little as possible effort and energy. And so we are good at compressing, at prefiguring images before they exist.
Right. And, as much as, with the invention of photography, we learned to look at details in a way that we hadn't done before. So there's always this evolution, right, in our relationship to images. What really struck me when I see what you do with your artworks is the complex work that the complex process that's being done in starting with this very low resolution images to sort of create some tri-dimensional experience of them, but at the same time kind of losing something else. And this work is done both by the studio and by you. You still have pretty much a solo practice, mostly drawing and painting, even though we don't really see much of that in the final artwork. And and that's actually one of the things that it's really, really interesting today is the possibility to go through the work, oil workers with you, to see that the process that's hiding besides what we saw online and what we keep seeing in international museums around the world.
Would you like me to share my screen, my PowerPoint at this moment?
Very much so.
Let's see if I manage to do so. There we are. And then do you see anything?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I see the installation at Kunsthalle Mainz in 2013.
Okay, good. I'm glad it's received on the other side. So I wanted to share with you some thoughts and some things from my kitchen, I could say. The way I cook up works. And usually I spend about 1.5 years to make a piece. Of course, since last year, it's been much slower. And we've been working for 2 years on a new work that's not yet quite finished, but that's like sort of the average time of production would be 2 years. And oil workers, I was thinking about the Belgian work that is tackling the view on, let's say, the post-colonial situation, of which I knew I would always do this slightly different. Yeah, and I would have to counter the obvious narrative of yeah, the white artist versus the colonial past of the nation in which he lives and resides. And the way I usually tackle these this sophisticated matter is by not mentioning those historical facts at all, and by focusing on phenomena that usually are not associated with the socio-political realm at all, such as matter. It could be ice, could be water, could be many things that all have in common that one could remember them. One didn't necessarily have to see them to believe them. One could close their eyes and remember those phenomena. So with oil workers, it was starting from this image, which is a small snapshot found on the internet, of which I've lost trace now. But I remember that I noted down some lines and that became the title. And from there I started essentially with doing, as I always do, is some informal gathering of material, in this case images of rain on a wet street and oil mixing with water. But I knew from second number one that this work was going to be about the synthetic mixing of water and oil through digital imaging. Because we always tend to think that we have an analog world and then we have a digital world or a virtual world. But maybe I should pause for a moment and to explain what my idea is about this journey between the analog and the virtual.
Yes, I think that would be important because I think not all the people that are listening to us are familiar with what you mean. And you know, by this, it seems a very simple terminology, but actually it's not.
No, it's quite sophisticated also because there's a lot of misconceptions about what the analog is, as well as the virtual. But some things that the virtual always has in common with every way it manifests is that it's underway. It's neither an original and it never ends. So it basically makes me think of what Bruno Latour a long time ago described as being an airplane taking off from an airport. And the captain announces the news that unfortunately the airport no longer exists when everybody is in mid-air. But that we have another difficulty is that the destination airport doesn't exist anymore either. So you're forced to stay in mid-air. And I think that characterizes the virtual. The virtual never arrives, but it's far enough from its, let's say, analog original to lead a new life. And that's the way I always think in terms of what digital matter could be. What matter? Digital? I thought it was virtual, so it's no matter at all. No, it is in effect matter, but it just doesn't lead a life as palpable.
Have a weight.
Sorry?
It doesn't have a weight.
Yes, it doesn't have a certain weight to it, and one could say the weight is imaginary, but as we will see maybe later, that's not always true. So the image that you're seeing here is the way we set up a system of 45 digital cameras in my studio with a very equal undefined light on top and on the sides. With here you can see one of the figures posing for our camera. So those were essentially all actors or figurants that didn't know where they would end up. We didn't, in fact, use the photography at all from those cameras, but we used, we produced a 3D photogeometrical model from them, which became my dear zombies. So they were, they were both, right? At that point, they were both, this is a sort of mid-air stage of their transformation. And they slowly become, one could say they shed, of course, their personality, and they become emptied out from anything else but, let's say, superficial gesture. You can see someone smiling, but there are no eyes. You can see a clay model of a figure, but there are no textures and no materials attached to the figure. And I learned a lot from this process, which is nothing new. This is very common practice nowadays. And I believe in a generation from now, every second sort of high school student will be able to produce material that looks like this. But what one should remember maybe is that the zombie, of course, this is something I didn't actually realize when I started the work, is that the zombie is both the worker, historically, is the figure throughout modernity who hasn't got a place in society. It's someone without a home, emptied out and roaming the earth, so to speak, but without an internal consistency, pretty much like this figure. And one could also say maybe that applies to the migrant worker who, or at least the role that's attributed to the migrant worker, of being in fact invisible content-wise, but just occupying space. Yeah. And then I did provide eyes to my characters, but I basically then they were placed according to what we try to reconstruct as faithfully as possible from that
original,
that found image. Yeah, we might call that an original, but in images there is no such thing as an original.
That's true.
An image is it's an illusion. You know, the original image is dangerous. Yeah, I wouldn't really dance with it.
Especially in a non-analog world.
Yes. So some illustrations of how.
So they were basically just shells you applied.
Yes, basically what we do is, in fact, how our nervous system also processes visual data is you separate shape from texture, from contour, silhouette, shadow, highlights, specularity. All these things become, I would say, virtual image making is nothing else but then repeating in a more refined version the history of painting, isn't it? Since the Renaissance panel painting, there are processes that are quite similar sometimes. I'm showing you, well, this is one of the images of the final piece.
Yeah.
With some more detailed. Strangely enough, the more ordinary your image looks or your situation looks, the harder we will associate it with virtual image making.
Yeah, you expect something
you Exactly. You expect when something is expensive to produce, you expect it to look expensively. This is something that has been with painting since the Van Eyck brothers painted the altarpiece in Ghent, is that what was expensive to produce had to look expensively. And that's being scattered with basically only with the invention or the development of photography around the 1850s.
And I remember that when we were installing this online exhibition, you were the only artist that explicitly asked the loop. You really wanted that, people entered our page online and immediately, they had to see the video looping in front of their eyes. And this makes me think about your relationship with time. Some of your artworks are just 10 or 20 minutes. Then there is this incredible piece, Olympia, the real-time disintegration into ruins of the Berlin Olympic Stadium over the course of 1,000 years, that actually started in 2016 and is precisely 1,000 years long. So you say that you sculpt in duration. And that's true that even in this work, you basically churned a one-time event of these people waiting under the bridge, waiting for the rain to stop. You turned it into a very existential, cyclical condition that obviously makes you think about productivity, capitalism, and also yearning for a better future. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to ask you a little bit to tell me and tell us, obviously, this presence of time, this altered time in your work.
Well, I mean, anybody who's working in film and or with the camera and who's working within the system of 25 still frames per second will always be baffled about what's going on in between inert matter of a still and then the illusion of movement, what we call animation, which literally is a replica of life, yeah. And its relation to time. I guess after apart from my practice as a draftsman, which I mainly do out of meditation, I'm really fascinated mainly with the passage of time and with the transformative capabilities of duration. Something of which I'm not always sure that clock time allows it. Because what clock time does is essentially keeping things in check. It's a very necessary modern invention. You could never synchronize a global world if you didn't have clock time and if you didn't have all these rules that prevent us from perceiving time differently. And I was confronted with someone coining heterochrony as the multitude of times, of which I'm not sure I agree. I think heterochrony to me signifies a multitude of times that are very defined, but they don't signify the stretchability of, or the stretching of duration. The fact is, time is like consciousness. It's, in a sense, it only becomes visible through the vortex of change. The vortex of change, which is that which you don't see immediately, but which you only see at the periphery of life, through degrading materials, to your own degrading body, or other, blossomings and decaying and whatever have you, but it's impossible to measure. Yeah. Such as is it impossible to define what would make consciousness. One hears these ridiculous attempts at defining it, both consciousness and time. And in fact, one should say they really only ever become visible through matter, through the changes in matter. And duration is it's basically the sculpting stuff in which I carve. And
that's a very, very good way of saying it, because it really, I think it really make people understand many, many different works of yours.
Look, when we look at an animation, life comes from that animation. And we are basically dead spectators. We're there sitting, getting older. Now, when you sculpt in duration, that no longer, this unilateral passage of time is no longer happening in this way. You feel yourself processing, and that's what matters, is you feel the difference between minute 1 and minute 10. Mm-hmm. And even if where you have been hasn't altered, you have altered. So one could say I try to make a minimalist choreography of the slightest changes in people watching.
Yes, yes. In fact, I'm also thinking how you sculpting in duration doesn't mean like just doing your own thing as an artist and be completely disconnected from our surroundings. For example, like in some of the texts that I've read that you wrote, in these past years, you're actually making a statement also to be an artist and move away from a time-pressed economy where monetization and organization means that we come to think of time as a package of marketable units. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was also interesting. And your idea of being an artist that is, understanding this world around him and making a choice, a different choice, a choice to stay out of these marketable units.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think an artist always looks for those unexpected aspects of the work he or she is active in, and I would say something similar happened to painting the way it happens to the let's say the mechanically reproduced or electronically reproduced image to the photograph or nowadays is going through a rapid change of appreciation. And obviously in time is money. Yeah, it's so easy to click away when the animation is not liked and to go on to something else that makes of images something sugary, something that requires instant gratification. And I think painters, when photography became industrially introduced, painters were looking for a similar way out of what they felt was a different marketing of the art in which they had been active. And this is what I'm trying to do with film and with the moving image. I mean, it's not necessarily a capitalist critique, although it's obvious that time is money. Yeah. But I would rather, with a smile, say in that sense, yeah, let's have a lot of it, and be rich.
Actually, you were talking about this entertainment part of moving images and especially cinema. And it makes me think of another works of yours, The Pure Necessity, where you literally stripped away the life of the characters of the Jungle Book.
Mm.
And you literally turned them, well, you turned them back into animals, basically. And you know, and somehow this laziness seemed to characterize them. You know, they're not singing and jumping and dancing, and you know, as we're used to see them, you know, in Disney movies. And that was quite shocking for me to, you know, watch that work for the first time, because it's incredible. You basically reconstructed this this movie, this animation, from a complete different perspective.
Yeah, it's. I think
Maybe I can share the screen a moment so that I show the
Sure.
people what I'm talking about.
Shall I stop share? Can I
Yes.
do that? Or, yeah.
Yes, so that I'm sharing and I'm showing them what I'm talking about while you start speaking about it. Because I'm not sure everyone is familiar with this work. Here we are, The Pure Necessity. You see Baloo here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very creepy.
Yeah, you mentioned they became again or once more animals in the jungle, although maybe one should not take that too literal. I stuck quite closely to the scenes of the Jungle Book animation, including the anthropomorphic features of the different characters. But I think the main component becomes memory in it. I would say, just like everybody knows who Allah or Jesus Christ is, or the Beatles, most people on this planet have a certain awareness of who Baloo is and Mowgli and the other characters and what the Jungle Book story is about. So I worked with the memory of that film, which you are looking at right now, right here, but which you're basically not seeing, which you are seeing in your past. And for me, the challenge there was about generating that space in between. And I think, you know, wealth or richness is always about not achieving something, but about enjoying the space that lies in between 2 points. And it is this moment in 1967, one could say, and our time. It's that space where characters perform, they become famous, and then they lose their fame, they grow old, and they go in retirement, yeah, and then they have no more job. And I was always fascinated with being retired. You know, I think, I'm not sure if a lot is said about that, but there's probably, or at least with me, there was an obsession between making art and being retired, yeah? Not
having
active.
that pressure of performance and scheduling.
Yeah, I disliked the idea of the young and the active and you know, the young blood. I disliked that idea, and I dreamt of my ideal situation was to be 65, 67 when I was age 25, and actually to work, basically to produce in the past. So that those aspects of time have always been there.
Right, and you know, with these works like Oil Workers, but also The Pure Necessity, you were telling me that was quite a turning point in your practice, in the sense that you consciously understood you were working with the lack of trust in relation to what we see. And I was wondering if you could, you know, expand on this concept and maybe some, you know, mentioning also the silence of the lens, this this text that, well, it's so very important for me. Like I always tell my students to read it and think about it, because I think it's a very interesting perspective into our present, and you know, and make you think what, you know, what are we expecting in the next few years to happen.
Yes, you're right. Around the time of 2013, 16, I realized that what we know as a collective confidence system, so that which is familiar, that which we can trust in to go on in life, is in our time partly fulfilled by the existence of photographic evidence. And you and I are here together, but we are not together. We are intermediate or mediated, sorry, by this screen, by that which is flat. And we trust that we are there. So it's the idea of family and of belonging there. It's a kind of grounding process. And I realized that this is a very important factor of modernity being played there by the photographic apparatus, is that, you know, this has been, and that we are transitioning into another age where we are no longer so confident of our own vision. So there is a renewed and reconfigured relation between our cognition and our automatic, let's say, perception. And that triggered me to study cognitive sciences and the history of perception and photography, of course. The image that you're seeing here is illustrating this transition, not quite into the virtual, but the first part, from the analog to the digital photograph, where one could say on the left, you have the analog, the sensitive surface, which is essentially politically liberal.
Yeah.
It can accommodate anything that it encounters. So it doesn't have a particular opinion. Yeah, it's fixed chemically. So it's really situated there in between the idea of the Enlightenment and the idea of the Industrial Revolution. That's where the photographic image comes from. It's a way of negotiating in life with a device and with a proof that's autonomous and that did not need an author. It needed an operator, yes, but it didn't need an author. Then when we go to digital photography, we see the same surface being broken up in little parts. And those little parts actually no longer possess this, one would say, old concept of liberalism. There is a very strong interpretative component to digital photography. And from there, since the mid-70s to the mid-90s, this period is situated, starts what many feel as a turning point. Yeah. Where this goes is impossible to say. But what it questions, I think, is clear. It questions a renewed relation and a goodbye to this confidence system which existed via the camera, via the apparatus.
Somehow we're not anchored to anything real anymore. And in fact, something that I really treasure reading in your text is the fact that you think we're literally going back to the 80s, well, to before the 80s, 50s. So really before the invention of photography, in the sense that, we're literally disconnected from the reality. We live in a world of pure ideologies, of pure representations.
Yeah, the technologies we use to in daily life, including the screen that we are all sharing right now, are descendants from the Cartesian divide of body and mind.
Mm-hmm.
They seem to prefer the mind over the body. And that's something that any artist will fight against, I imagine, or at least I would. My tools are not those, well, they're trying to, the virtual does split up mind and body like never before. One could say we hear some sound and we have some retinal reflections, and that is enough for generating a confident system. But it's very little in the end, yeah. And it does resemble, especially in a year in the pandemic, it does resemble a very shallow form of communication and trust, yeah.
Well, that's true that most of the actors today in cinema productions, they work, with the green screen. So even, everything that they're acting about, it's completely out of context, just as much as your models, as you were reconstructing the little photo that you sourced, oil workers. There is a complete disconnection. And well, while I'm telling people that are following us that we are absolutely open to questions, if they want to ask something to David, after looking so closely into the processes behind the final artwork that we see in museums and art institutions, I just wanted to ask you. I mean, during this pandemic, we have really accelerated our relationship to the virtual. And as you wrote in Silence of the Lens, this is connected to a deteriorating visual condition. But during the pandemic, it was often the only possible condition because we were in lockdown. We couldn't go out. We're living in these domestic spaces that we were trying to amplify, through our screens. And I myself often felt I was living inside my head. And because of this world of pure representation is embedded in a system of algorithms, I mean, the so-called surveying capitalism, only a certain type of digital contents was showing in the web pages. So it was also very repetitive. And do you think that this overexposure to the virtual that we had, I would say, this, well, in Italy we would say grande buffata, it just had too much, has revealed its limits. And as an artist, as I see all this, group of artworks that you've produced in the past years, can you reveal us what is the thin red line that connects these projects, and what is your antidote to this deterioration of our visual experience?
So, I mean, those are a few questions in one. I think you asked. Yeah.
I'm taking fully advantage of you.
My antidotes are, my strategy is always sleep with your enemy and understand your enemy. And that's why I very happily work with compositing and with virtual image making, because I use as a metaphor our condition as the condition of someone who's turning blind. and who needs to rely increasingly on bodily or embodied sensations from the past. So usually that will make me take recourse to phenomena that are really simple and that, as I said before, that can be remembered by anyone without opening your eyes. So to use that situation of closed eyes and looking with closed eyes, I think becomes a little bit more present, I would say, since a year. Not in the least because, of course, the enemy worldwide is invisible right now. And there's a number of things that have been accelerated, I would say. When the pandemic struck, I was reading a text through someone I admire a lot. I was reading a text by a Canadian, I think, or US psychologist named Louis Sass, who wrote a book, Modernity and Madness. And there are strange things happen when you become too much aware of the processes of seeing and being. When every step you take has to be thought through. And as if every step you take forward implies taking 2 steps back and rethinking it. This is a pathological condition that's known as hyper-awareness or over-awareness, and which can literally freeze a person into not being able to progress in life. And I would say that the care and the fragility of the situation during the pandemic resembles that process of being hyper aware of what we do with our body. And therefore it even splits up the body-mind situation even further, yeah, which is very deplorable. So those are a few thoughts around that. I can go on for another hour on this matter.
I know. I mean, we had great conversations about this. So the difference is this is public. I'm checking if, because our hour is almost out, if somebody wants to ask something. I know I think we presented a lot of contents, and I'm sure that people are also kind of overwhelmed by all this, revealing all this thought process between what looks actually very simple works. Something that I felt like adding is that as David's works are often very large installations, and so there is very much, as you say, the concept is often simple, not easy to produce, but it's very simple, and then you have this very physical experience where sometimes the passage of time is offered through a light change. Sometimes, as in oil workers, is this elliptical movement, that you can really perceive actually on the lower part of the image, where he say there is this oil kind of water mixing. It just really feels very, very material, although it's completely abstract. And many times, I mean, we didn't mention this, but it's obvious because often he starts with photographs with JPEGs, but there is often no sound in his work. And maybe you just want to add on this decision of having no sound in your work. I mean, and I think it's very important in this case, as it was, when I said original, to just say no sound and not silence, for example.
Well, yeah, sound adds the, the temporality to the image, but in fact it's disconnected. Yeah, it's. I am one of those few people that deplore the day that the technical invention of gluing sound on top of a moving image was possible. And that has led me to research what are the relations between the different senses and the different sensorial inputs. Where does the visual reside? Why do we have visual culture and not, let's say, tactile culture? How close is the visual to the tactile, and what's the place of sound? Personally, sound does not necessarily have a place with the image, and certainly not on top of the image. There I had an interesting debate or dispute with Tacita Dean a few years ago about the relation between image and sound. And you can see that visual artists tend to treat sound really quite badly as a psychological layer over or underneath, or as a psychological current underneath an image, which I absolutely avoid whenever I can avoid it. And usually you will see that there's a precise reason for me to use sound when I do.
Yes, and I think we have a question. So it's actually a Maltese artist, and so I'm very happy about that. Matthew Attard, thank you for this great presentation. I'm aware that the argument is very complex, but how much is the virtual an extension of the artist's thinking making in the same way a brush or pencil is when drawing, painting?
It's a good question.
It's a really good question, especially because Matthew clearly knows, the process and what we didn't show much about, all the painting work that you still do.
I think, again, I should refer to this in-between space that you look for. When you look at your surface, at your canvas or at your piece of paper or your screen, and then you look at the tools with which you work, obviously your embodied relation is different between the filmmaker and the painter. But what's similar is that you're working with in-between space, and you're looking for openings in between space. Remember what I said about the virtual, about it being on a journey without having the chance to return to origin, but neither having the ambition to arrive at destination. That's what the virtual is. Well, basically, this is very much present in the history of painting as well. And I would say in the relation that as an artist you have with your tools, and then that where those tools land. The destination is not the final destination, is not the final point. Does that make sense?
Well, I guess Matt should. So thank you. Okay. Okay, wait, another question. I appreciated your comments on hyper-awareness. It sounds like you see this as a curse of our time. How much time in your life do you spend on screens observing as opposed to being? And how do you strike the balance between the two? That's a very existential question.
Right.
But you were telling me yesterday that you haven't watched a movie like...
Yeah, I canceled out movie watching, except for a few rare occasions, once every 5 years. because one has to, well, I mean, it's a matter of being on a diet in a way. You can't have it all. So my form of meditation, that which brings everything back together, is I would say reading. And I share with Peter Sloterdijk, maybe some of you know who Peter Sloterdijk is. When he was younger, I believe he used cyclotouring, traveling with his bicycle, as a form of meditation. And I depend very much on those few things to reconnect me. Other than that, I spend an abnormal amount of time on the screen. And I've thought, and I did quite a bit of research on the consequences of our relation to the screen, but other people do that much more profound and better than I do. But yes, I spend an awful lot of time, but crucially, I try to treat everything that's flat, like, let's say, photography, everything that has ever appeared in a book or on screen or on the internet. I try to treat it as an orphan, as a refugee, as something dislocated.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of treating it in a manipulative or power relation, or even pornographic submissive situation, I try to take care of it and to welcome it in my archive of orphaned or orphanized children and refugees. And that's how I treat images. They are flat, they have lost their limbs, they have only got their mind. And nevertheless, I believe it is possible to generate out of only mind, limbs, and embodiment. And that is the situation that I try to occupy as a, oh, this is my cat biting me. I'm having a fight with another body here.
Complaining.
Yeah, he was in danger of touching the mouse. So to conclude, or actually I have concluded, I treat images as orphans.
I do have a very, very last question. I mean, we're taking another one from the public if you want, but it's true that we were mentioning this fact that you know, somehow with this in this world of pure representations, we live in the past, we live in the memory, and that even though we are mainly coping with animated materials, you know, video games in 3D, still very similar, you know, relation to post photography world, you know,
Mm-hmm.
mainly painting post pre 1850s. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think is different, you know, still being, you know, somehow, you know, in this world of pure representation between, you know, those paintings from the pre-photographic area and these animations that we are presently.
Yeah. I think it's an occupation that our culture has with, you know, when we look at the binary between 1 and 0, when I do this, what is dominating here? Obviously, it's the 1. Yeah, we are occupied with energy. This is what is driving the West. This is yang, and this would be yin. Yeah, and yang is dominant in the West. And what we are doing with image, with our visual culture, is we're exploiting it to the max in terms of energy and animation, in terms of trying to figure out how to maximize profit through visual culture, how to maximize energy. And there's always going to be, I'm often thinking about this binary. Why are we in a situation that we're basically dominated by computing processes that use the binary, the ones and the zeros, but that seem to be using them in favor for the yang, in favor of the one, yeah, in favor, as if energy is all that matters, and as if as much as possible animation and gratification is what matters. I seem to have lost a little bit your question.
Well, I was just talking about the difference between, you know, this paint. Well, it seems to me that the painting and the animation, it seemed to me that in this binary relationship with the computer, we actually lost even more of what we had with paintings.
Yes, but this analogy with the 1850s, where painters were really properly in despair until, let's say, for more than a century. This analogy is useful, but it's not absolute. So around the 1850s, and I'm suggesting that we're going back to the pre-photography era. Really, this analogy is not 100% correct. Of course, it's not the Dark Ages. But there is a really clear reevaluation of what is truth. And what we have confidence in, and it manifests itself in a lack of truth in politics and truth in information and truth in the visual system to begin with. So that is a big question, and therefore the 3 C's of dark optics: concept, conversation, and consensus. It starts with concept. It starts with something that you fabricate, that you concoct, and then you speak about it, you encounter the difficulties, you process it, and you come up with a compromise. That's the future condition of looking.
Thank you so much, David. We also have some messages in our chat that, you know, looking forward to exploring David's work. Great question, but I don't remember which one it was. It's a few minutes ago. So, I think we can stop sharing screen so we can say goodbye, you know, with our faces, say goodbye to our participants. Thank you so much, everyone, to tune in, and we're obviously gonna make this material available. And yes, I hope that you're gonna visit David Clairbaug's website and learn more about his work, because he's an incredible artist. I actually knew his work since 2008 when I first saw his show at Centre Pompidou, and it was incredibly powerful already back then, even before the turning point. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you everybody for attending.
Okay, have a good evening.
You
Bye-bye.
too. Bye.